Can you start with your name and educational background?
Okay, my name is Michael Atkinson, and my educational background, I went to high school here at Treatland High School. I've got an undergraduate degree in agricultural education from the University of Georgia, a master's of agricultural leadership from the University of Georgia, and a PhD in career and technical education from Auburn University.
Okay, and then what school are you at, what age group do you teach, and what is your content area?
So I'm at Treatland High School here in Soperton, Georgia, and I teach agricultural education to grades 9 through 12.
Do you prefer direct instruction, guided instruction, or constructivism approaches to your teaching?
I do a lot of direct instruction since what I teach is a lot of based in skills. This may be sort of constructivism, or somewhere in the middle, a blend of all really. I use some guided stuff for some of my students with disabilities that need that extra help. But a lot of what I do is teaching skills, and then students will attempt those skills and they get feedback and try to get better at those skills. So overall, I probably do a little bit of each of those.
How important to you, if at all, is developing critical thinking skills or creativity in your students?
Wow, there's a lot to that question. I think critical thinking is key. I'll give one example from something that I teach, which is in electrical wiring. Everything that we do when teaching electrical wiring is all very logical. So you have to take a set of rules and apply it to a problem. And I think the ability to think critically is super key in doing that. And really the only way students get better at that is by doing it over and over again and seeing different scenarios. I think the creativity piece is important too, and that's something that I'm kind of lacking in, but I try to structure assignments so that students do have some freedom in creativity and are able to, express themselves in different ways. And I was always a student that really liked things to be very black and white, but I have a lot of students that want to express their creative side. So I think that is very important that we're giving them an opportunity to be creative, especially now with the rise of generative AI that kind of can do a lot of thinking for you, that we need to be very intentional about developing creativity and critical thinking skills in students.
Would you describe your classroom management style?
I'll control chaos most days. We have since we work a lot in the lab or outdoors, I try to minimize the amount of time in the classroom. I do have a routine of students come in and they have something to do on the board. Whether or not they do it can be in question sometimes. But there is a routine, and I try to be, especially when we're working in the shop, or in the lab, I try to keep things very organized out there. So we have a routine of how we clean up every day and how we share tasks among students when we're cleaning up, whether it's sweeping or putting up materials or making sure all the safety equipment's put away. So, but I've never been one of those teachers where, we have to have the room super quiet all the time. So it's always a little chaotic, and we've always got a lot of different things going on, it seems like.
What tips do you have about classroom management?
I think you got to develop your own style and see what works for your students. I teach high school because my style would not fit an elementary or middle school classroom. And I just don't have, you got to find what works for your temperament. And it takes some trial and error when you first start teaching, in that, I figured out I couldn't stand everybody being quiet all the time. And that just didn't work for me. And I'm also, some people like to use some kind of, reward system or handing out tickets. That's another thing. I was never organized enough to make that kind of thing work. So I had to, for me, I always work a lot better developing relationships with students, and hopefully if they, for the ones I could get along with, or I could, connect with their interests, they probably acted a little bit better, I think, some of the time. And, I never tried to get real loud or, try to be pretty even keeled. So they know if I was actually mad, they knew I was for real.
To what extent do you believe it's a teacher's job to motivate students to learn, and how does this relate to students developing their own sense of agency?
Oh man, another heavy hitting question. There's a certain degree of intrinsic motivation that students have got to have, and to be able to learn something, especially teaching an elective. I always tell students on the first day, it's like, look, guys, this is an elective class. You don't have to be here. You can go down the hall and take basket weaving, or underwater BB stacking, or something like that, and you don't have to be in my room. So and some students say maybe they don't want to be in here at first, but along the way we find something that motivates them or interests them. And so I think, connecting to student interests can help build some motivation. But ultimately, as far as completing assignments and, achieving things in class or in school or in life in general, students have got to want to do that. We can lead them and guide them, but ultimately, when it comes time to put pen to paper, they've got to be willing to do it.
How do you assess student learning?
Well, I assess student learning in a lot of different ways. Since my class is more lab based, I do a lot of skill assessment with students. Whether it's can you wire this circuit? Can you weld these two pieces of metal? Can you measure the height of this tree? Can you identify this species of wildlife? But I also use written exams and quizzes from time to time as well. So I try to use a pretty wide variety, and we do different projects and things. So there's really no one way that I assess students. But I think using that variety of methods probably helps some students because maybe they're good at one thing but not very good at a written test. So trying to use a broad method of assessment throughout the course.
Do you differentiate? I don't know how to say that word. Instruction? If so, how?
Yeah, so differentiation, it seems like it's been a hot topic in education. It's always one of those things that's really hard to define, it seems like. And so sometimes, I might differentiate the process by which we're doing it. And so one of the ways I've done that, I'll come back to electrical wiring example. I can assign different students different wiring problems of different difficulties. So you've always got some real speedster students that maybe they've got a little bit of experience in the area, and they're just way ahead of everybody else. We're going to throw those students a little bit of extra challenge, going above and beyond, and differentiate it in that way. And then for some of maybe your lower end students, for example, if we're taking an ID quiz, or students have to identify tree specimens, everybody else in the class might have to remember what we're identifying and be able to write those names down. Whereas another student maybe with special needs is getting a 2 or 3 multiple choice kind of option with that. So try to differentiate in different ways, and it's hard to do with. And if anybody tells you it's easy to differentiate, they're telling a story. Especially my classes tend to be very mixed ability levels. I've literally had a class where with seniors in it, and both the valedictorian and the person who was ranked dead last in that class were in the same classroom. So it can be a challenge at times.
How do you create a good work-life balance?
Well, if you figure that out, please let me know. Before I had children, of course, teaching ag, somebody, as an undergraduate, somebody told us in a methods class that, a good ag teacher only has to work a half a day. If you work 12 hours a day, you can get everything done. And so, when I can remember before I had children, I can remember I'd typically get to work around 6:30 in the morning, and I'd be prepping stuff from the first class of the day. And I can specifically remember a lot of days when I was teaching in Wilkes County. I would leave, and it would be supper time, and I'd roll through to McDonald's and get a 20 count McNugget and go home and go to bed and do it all over again the next day. And so, but I've gotten better at that over the years. I've gotten more efficient at what I do. I have. Especially as you develop curriculum materials that you're comfortable with over the years, the classroom portion tends to become a smaller and smaller part of what you have to prep for as much. And so I'm able to focus more on other areas of the program. Because when you first start teaching, it's such a, whatever your curriculum is, whatever your standards are, it's just such a huge mountain to climb. The learning curve is very steep at first, and the curriculum, the state standards are one thing, but developing that in your curriculum and your style and what you're comfortable with, and just learning it, and because when you've got to just be one day ahead of the students, you're having to teach all day and then spend all afternoon or evening learning what you're going to teach the following day. So once you build a good base of knowledge, I think that work-life balance starts to improve a lot. And I don't know if we do a good job explaining that to early career teachers, that look, it's going to kind of suck at first. It's just really going to suck. And, I think that has a lot to do with our attrition rate, retention rate for early career teachers. And even more so in agricultural education, because we have such a broad program, and I could leave this, if I could leave this job here and go somewhere and teach totally different subjects, end up teaching animal science and floral design, and that I would be right back on the steep learning curve all over again, having to develop curriculum. So overall, developing a work-life balance, it can be really, really tough. And I know old folks have been teaching ag for 20 or 25 years, and they're still doing stuff on Sunday afternoons and weekends and staying late all the time. So I don't know if it ever really ends, but it does get a little bit better.
How did you become an ag teacher?
So my route was somewhat circuitous, circular in nature. And so as a young person, I was a 4-H'er for a long time. I was, every year I was in school, I was here at our local 4-H chapter, or 4-H club here in Treatland County. And my senior year of high school, I finally took an ag class, and I enjoyed that, and did some forestry stuff, and was on the parliamentary procedure team. But I already kind of had my eyes set on education, and specifically in music education as a band director. So I go off to the University of Georgia, and I majored in music education, and I had when you're a music major, you have to take private lessons in your major instrument, and I was a trombone player, and we had a trombone professor who was he was old school and cruel, and I just figured out pretty quickly that this thing that I enjoyed was not something I wanted to make a career out of. And so I remember I was just kind of soul searching, and I guess maybe the Lord just put it in my head that, hey, why don't you try this ag ed thing? And so I really thought about going into extension at first, but the university there wasn't a major like in agricultural extension. The closest thing was agricultural education. So after my first semester at Georgia, I changed my major to ag ed, and started learning a lot more about the program, and did my apprentice teaching, and it's all been downhill from there. So I kind of attribute it to divine intervention, that the Lord put me where he thought I needed to be at the right time, and so here I am.
How do you stay current with the practices in ag ed?
Well, the great thing about agriculture education is that we of course, we have a couple conferences every year that all the ag teachers are required to go to, and we're also required to attend at least one class a year through the Career and Technical Agriculture Education Resource Network, which is state funded. And so I try to take at least one class a year. For example, this summer or in June, I'm signed up for a class on management of pine plantations, to help increase my knowledge in forestry a little bit. And I'm a pretty voracious reader as well. If I see a news article or something related to my field of study, I'm going to read it. And I consume probably a lot of information every week, and it's almost a hobby to me, and learning more about agriculture. And I also like going. The Georgia Young Farmers offers a summer tour every year, which is in different parts of the state. You learn how agriculture works in those parts of the state, and get to talk to producers. So try to stay on the cutting edge of what I do, so I can share what those career opportunities are with our students.
What is your belief/philosophy on agricultural education?
Wow.
I know.
So I think, when every semester, the first thing I do at the beginning of every class is I start with the 3-component model of agricultural education. And, when you look at that model, it's 3 circles like a Venn diagram that overlap. And I remember being told years ago what's important about that model is that, number one, all the circles are the same size and that the circles overlap. And so those 3 circles are classroom and lab, SAE, and FFA. And so, and actually state law in Georgia is that every agriculture education program has equal components of that. So that can be hard to do because I spend 6 hours, well, I guess 4.5 hours in front of students every day. And so the question is, do I spend 4.5 hours on FFA and SAE every day as well? And those percentages I would say kind of go up and down. But overall, the reason agriculture education has been so successful since the Smith-Hughes Act in 1917 and even before that, when you only had it at the support at the local level for agriculture education around this country, I think that model is what made it so successful. And so as long as I'm teaching ag, adhering to that model and having those 3 important parts is super important. And another, I guess, part of my teaching philosophy that I've already heard years ago that really stuck with me was that the 2 things to help you be successful as a teacher is if you got to know your content, you got to know your stuff, and that comes with time. You can't learn everything in one semester or one day, but know your content and you care about the students, and you show some interest in their lives and care about them and ask how things are going and just be a person to them. And there's been a lot of kids over the years that, man, I just wanted to adopt them and take them home with me because they were just awesome kids and maybe things weren't great at home. But I think if you can adhere to that 3-component model and you can know your content and care about the kids, I think you can be fairly successful in this career.
How does participation in FFA positively impact students?
Oh gosh, that's the biggest recruitment tool that we've got. There's students who they probably wouldn't take an ag class if they didn't have to be an ag class to be an FFA, and that train kind of runs both ways. Students don't see some of the awesome stuff we do in FFA until they take an ag class, and so I think, like I said, that's a third of the program, and so it's got to be there, and it offers a great, I guess, a carrot on a stick out in front of them to achieve a little bit more, because you can, I think about one young man in particular. He, if I told him in 8th grade, hey man, you're really going to enjoy measuring tree heights and diameters and calculating volume, he'd be like, whatever, man. But sure enough, he won a cord volume pulpwood estimation event last week, and he was super excited. He's as excited as he could be about measuring tree heights and diameters, and that's all because of that FFA component and what it gives to our students. So I think it's super vital to what we do every day.